Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Debashis, Basu, and I are excited to welcome all of you to what is bound to be an insightful conversation with Mr. Arun Shourie, gutsy and extraordinary editor who managed to shake up the nation several times with his own report and those of journalists who were fortunate enough to have had an opportunity to work with him. A warm welcome to you, Mr. Shourie. It's a privilege to have you in this discussion of your latest book, The Commissioner for Lost Causes, which is all about your years as a journalist and when journalism itself attracted a lot of respect and expectations from the people. As trustees of Moneylife Foundation, a 12-year-old NGO engaged in spreading financial literacy and advocacy for savers, we see this conversation as crucial to the life part of Moneylife. Readers, especially today, need to understand what to read, how to read between the lines, and the games played by politicians, industrialists, bureaucrats, as well as the media, and how the judiciary impacts us all. Your book covers all these aspects and more in the most blunt and forthright manner possible. Before I ask Debashis to introduce Mr. Shourie formally, a few details about today's event. This conversation is being streamed on YouTube and Facebook. It'll also be available for viewing on our YouTube channel, Moneylife TV. You may want to view the webinar in speaker mode for optimal viewing. We also hope that we will have time for a general interaction at the end of this conversation. We'll reach out to all those who use the raised hand buttons, then we know you have a question to ask. But meanwhile, please feel free to post questions and observations in the chat mode. If you don't want your background visible and want to protect your privacy, you may want to switch off your camera. I now request Debashis to introduce Mr. Shourie.
Thanks, Sucheta. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome and introduce Mr. Arun Shourie, who has had many avatars in his long and eventful public life. He has been an economist, journalist, activist, prolific author, and also Minister of Communications and Information Technology and Minister in charge of disinvestment in the Vajpayee government. 67 and 77, he worked as an economist with the World Bank, and then for 2 years for the consultant with the Planning Commission of India, during which period he started to write articles criticizing the various economic policies of the government. At that time, it was the Indira Gandhi regime. In 1975, when emergency was declared, Mr. Shourie worked closely with senior opposition leaders, including Jayaprakash Narayan, and wrote blistering articles in the Indian Express, owned by the feisty Ramnath Goenka, who led the fight back against emergency. January 1979, Mr. Goenka appointed Mr. Shourie as executive editor of Indian Express, and India got a taste of an absolutely new kind of journalism. Not being trained as a journalist, Mr. Shourie was not limited by the conventional ideas of reporting, which is, as he describes in the book, as two-handed reporting. On the one hand, this, and the other hand, that. His technique was to combine investigation, litigation, campaigns, and also galvanizing the opposition leaders to make a noise in public interest. Its objective was to expose corruption and make the administration accountable, and the firebrand and path-breaking stint in Indian Express launched Mr. Shourie as one of the most powerful public intellectuals of the last 4 decades. In 1982, he was awarded the Ramon Magsaysay Award, quote from the citation, as a concerned citizen employing his pen as an effective adversary of corruption, inequality, and injustice. In 1990, he was awarded the Padma Bhushan. Between 1998 and 2004, and again between 2004 and 2010, he was a member of the Rajya Sabha. Since the 90s, Mr. Shourie has written almost one book every year on politics, religious issues, reservations, national security, and multiple books on a very important aspect of our lives, which is the judicial system. Last year, we were honored to have him and Dr. Vivek Debroy discuss his previous book, which is Preparing for Death. And here we are today to discuss his latest book, The Commissioner for Lost Causes, which is all about his highly inspiring and path-breaking stint with the Indian Express. Thanks, Sucheta. Over to you.
So, welcome again, Mr. Shourie. And before we start, folks, this is the book. It may look thick like all of Mr. Shourie's books, but believe me, I read it almost non-stop over a weekend. So don't stop at this conversation. I'd strongly recommend buy the book. And Mr. Shourie, I think I'm going to start this conversation by asking you about something that affects all of us as journalists today. And, to me, it was an eye opener that you faced so much of it because, we never know what a journalist faces until you write about it. So the falsehoods, the calumny, the propaganda unleashed against you during the Antule time, what you faced when your journalists broke the stories on the Bhagalpur blindings, the Kamala story, all the major scoops, and then of course Bofors. The mainstream media, even at that time, were tools in the hands of the ruling politicians. And it seems to be happening even today. You have an example of it on the back cover of the book. Yet, we seem to say that today the media has sunk to a new low and we seem to forget what it was then. So, what was your view? Was there as much of a Godi media and a Lucian's media even then?
And Sucheta, firstly, you have to educate me because now I am seeing only a reflection of myself on the TV, on the screen, and not you. How do I reverse this so that I can see you and Debashis?
Oh,
Can you
okay.
tell me how to do that, or I should just keep answering to myself?
I think if you
In any
go to,
case,
I think if you go to view and
So you can switch to gallery view.
pardon?
Sorry, you can switch
Okay.
to gallery view.
Gallery view.
Gallery view, from where should I do that? Okay, let's not interrupt this. I should not,
Top right.
Top right. No. Okay, I won't change anything. You see, actually, Sucheta, one thing is that yes, there were persons in journalism even at that time who prided themselves on the fact that they had access to uh, persons in authority, and I told Mrs. Gandhi this, and then for the Iran policy was changed like that, and so on. And they certainly and many newspapers, because of their owners and their editors, ingratiated themselves with the rulers. But they were not looked up to, I think, and people saw through them. Today, that has become the norm. I mean, you find very few voices, very few organizations, certainly in what is called the mainstream media, whether it is television, let's say NDTV, or it is the newspaper world, Indian Express, Telegraph, maybe the Deccan Herald, that there are very few papers and organizations which are standing up for the right values, for the truth. And then, but there's the other side also. And that is that in a sense, the subsidence, the collapse of the mainstream media and the greater force with which the government is coming down on the media has been met much more creatively this time than was the case in the emergency. For instance, persons, Moneylife, the Wire, the Print, all these Alt News, all these organizations have come up. They are small. They are run by dedicated individuals. The teams are also small. They are not that well funded as these big papers. And yet they are able to get the facts out. And they get the facts out to all of us. I can tell you, as a below average reader of newspapers, that other than the Indian Express, I don't read anything at all as far as these papers are concerned. But I always read Moneylife, I always read The Wire, and you get information from a variety of such sources. And small little groups have come up which are following some particular thing. For instance, because of this sedition case, I had needed some information to now be a regular visitor to an organization I did not know exists. it's maybe a loose association of youngsters called Article 14 on fundamental rights. Violations of that are then, or cases against people which impinge on fundamental rights are monitored by them, are put up on the internet, they are analyzed by them. What a wonderful thing. So there is this creative response also of the society to the high-handedness of the government and to the slavishness of the main media.
In fact, the fact is that thanks to the digital tools today, uh, every individual is actually far more empowered today, would you say? I mean, with just a mobile phone, net connection, and a social media account, everyone is potentially a journalist and a whistleblower. And if they have
Yes,
something, it can go viral.
that's a very good example. Take COVID. During the COVID crisis, other than Dainik Bhaskar and to some extent Indian Express, papers at least were not reporting what is actually happening in the cremation grounds, in the burial grounds, on the river banks. But individuals, among them a journalist like Barkha Dutt working on her own, but then number of persons, just as you said, with video, with the mobile cameras, they told us the truth. The same thing. After all, when those farmers were mowed down by a minister's son, no newspaper person was there because one cannot be everywhere, and no television crew was there, but somebody with a mobile camera took the video. Otherwise, these fellows would have denied everything. So you are absolutely right that every individual can be a journalist, and I do hope that conscientious people will put their mobile phones to good use. Don't doctor things and so on. Please, if you are a journalist, it's a public trust, and you are a trustee of society at that time, and you have to get the truth to them. But you can get the truth to them. So please do that.
So, Mr. Shourie, one of the saddest thing in your book was to read about how you called Ashwini Sarin and, the fact that he got out of journalism and got into business. And a brilliant journalist like him, the work he did, and the whole Kamala story. I mean, I wish we had an editor like you when I was around, because the manner in which you fought, you went to court, I don't see any editor, at least in my 35 years, no editor has stood up and done for me what you have done in terms of backing Ashwini Sarin. So I can't help thinking that if today with social media around, I think Sarin may have still been a journalist rather than having to get out of business, because, you said he broke down when you spoke to him. I don't think he would have broken down if he wasn't feeling bad about the fact that he was no longer in journalism. Because with all the negatives, we still love it, That's why we're still around. Would you agree?
Yes, that's one point. But there's another point, Sucheta, and that is that when the situation is intense or the project is, you are intensely involved, then the bonds which are forged at that time really last. And that's why I think Ashwini broke down. It was after 40 years that we were talking, and I certainly felt quite overwhelmed hearing him. I've been in Delhi now since December, but I've not been able to go and meet him. But all the bonds and all bonds formed at times when the situation was tense, when the things with which we were involved were intense, those have lasted. We can turn to each other for help. We try to inquire about each other as to how the person is. So it may not be only the fact that he chose to go from one profession to another profession, but it may be also the intensity of bonds which were forged at that time. And the Indian Express bonds have lasted all this while. The only comparable sets of bonds that I have were the bonds forged completely in childhood when we were in school together. Those bonds have lasted, and the Indian Express bonds have lasted. And with a few officers who worked, all of us worked together in government. Those were the bonds.
Debashis?
Uh, Editor B.G. Verghese has said, you're not really a journalist. I mean, he meant it like a slight, but that was your advantage, I would say, in a way. Your work in Indian Express created history, was an inspiration for so many people. And there has been nobody like you since. You had a very close working relationship with Ramnathji, and that was very unusual because editors and management are on two different sides. So, what explains the completely the different paths that you struck right from the beginning? It seems almost very natural to you that this is the way we should be doing a journalistic work, which is so completely different from anybody else. So, if you look back, what were your thoughts and how did you strike this path?
You know, the one big thing is when a person like Verghese or any one of them says he's not a journalist. Okay, so what? I'm not a journalist. When I was in government, they said he's not a politician. Okay, I'm not a politician. So what? You know, I remember Govindrao Talwalkar once told me that one of the best answers that he had seen to them was by a Marathi author. I do not remember the name. He said, "You please believe the worst about me. That I am a drunkard, I am a cheat, I am a liar, I am everything else. But what about the facts? Are the facts correct or not?"
Absolutely.
Similarly, I did not think very highly of the newspapers at that time. When Ramnathji asked me to join, after all, these very newspapers, the Indian Express apart, the Statesman apart, Himmat of Rajmohan Gandhi apart, Mr. Gorbala's opinion apart, these very few things, apart from them, the other papers were just government's megaphones. So why should we think that, if not being a journalist is such a bad thing? Yes, okay, we are not journalists. We will do what we think is right. The newspaper is just, or the TV channel is just a platform. It is a pencil. If I have a pencil in my hand, or I have a fountain pen, or I have a stylus, it's like that. It's just like that, nothing more. Should I venerate the pencil instead of the pen or the other way around? No. It is the use to which we put it. So I felt at that time that yes, it's a fine platform, and Mr. Goenka's great virtue was that he gave us the freedom to do things in the public interest. That was wonderful. So we should use that freedom for the public interest. So that is why it never occurred to me that I am a journalist, never. Or that as a journalist or as a newspaper, we can do this and not do that. Well, we do whatever it is the issue requires. Yes, for instance, to give you an example, in under trials, in the under trials case, we collected the information, but we didn't just publish it. We also supplied it to Mrs. Kapila Hingorani, who was getting it from other sources also, I'm sure. But we assisted her in that sense because she had taken up the matter in the Supreme Court. And it is this collaboration and the judge's empathy for persons who were suffering which led to good results. So what is wrong with that? So I never thought that, yes, I have now entered a profession and the rules of the profession are X, Y, or Z and I should abide by them. No.
Fortunately, you had the luxury to do it because you had the backing of someone like Ramnathji. And, the title of your book, as you said, he he told you that he would like to put a board outside your door calling you the Commissioner for Lost Causes. You chose that particular title for your, journalistic journey and the title of this book. Is it because you think 40 years later he was kind of prescient? Because you talked about you have written extensively on the judiciary. I have your courts and their judgments behind me over here. You have this big chapter where you've taken apart Justice Bhagwati's, flip-flops. But if you look at it, one of the biggest battles that you fought were, as you said, under trials. But today in India, 3 out of 4 people, as Pritish Nandi tweeted last week, are under trials today. So, things have gotten worse. The judicial system is now so slow, so expensive that it's out of the reach of the average person. And by the time they have their judgments 20, 30 years later, I keep saying the security scam investigation trial is still going on. It's an embarrassment 30 years later. So the Commissioner for Lost Causes seems like, all the fight, but there's only so much. You made a change at that time, but maybe the rest of the country didn't ensure that it remained. So it we seem to have slid back. Would that be a fair assessment?
I think 2, 3 things. Sucheta, this title has been greatly misunderstood, as if it is a confession of failure on my part. I'm not that modest, but it is one of the most affectionate things that Ramnathji said to me about me. It was his way of embracing, actually. But as far as lost causes are concerned, there are 2 points. First is that we are nobodies. Think of very, very, very big persons and the causes which they took up. The Buddha is gone, and we have still not learned or devoted time to controlling our minds. Jesus was crucified, and we had the same. Gandhiji was assassinated, and India is far from his dreams. So everybody's causes get lost. Those big people, that should be a consolation to us. But it also should induce modesty. When we work on what we think is a great cause, or even a transient cause, we only have toothpicks in our hand, and toothpicks only for a moment. After all, then okay, I'm dismissed after that. So toothpicks for a moment, and with toothpicks we cannot hope to change the shape of the ocean, that is India. But we must try. We must try a little bit, whatever little bit we can. And the reason why things don't change there are several reasons, but one of them is not enough persons work on any particular cause for a long time. I think it's Curzon, but I may be wrong, but I read somewhere that Curzon said Indians are soda water bottles. You open the cap and a lot of fizz comes up and it subsides. We have to persist. And those are the Buddha's words. Begin and persevere. We don't persevere. India is a land of many beginnings. Journals come up, they fade away. But we must persist. And a large number must do it. The second reason is that those who are benefiting from the way things are, they are really, in a sense, even inadvertently cooperating with each other to keep the system as it is. After all, delays in courts. You just had a wonderful story the other day in Moneylife on the number of cases that are now pending. Well, the fact of the matter is that somebody or the other is benefiting from the fact that the case is not being decided fully. As you have documented in the case of the bankruptcy code, when the bankruptcy is not resolved and some bids are not accepted, well, then somebody is benefiting from that. Maybe the original promoters will somehow or the other get ingratiate themselves with the banks again, and under some other guise get the asset, or the asset value will be further eroded. Lavas has a good point, a good case in point, and then you can buy it for a song. So somebody or the other is benefiting, and their actions are, in a sense, are coordinated with each other. And all of us who want to change the system, the few of us who then decide to work to change the system, we are not working in unison. That's not. So there are many lessons from those episodes. And you are right that the judicial system is much worse today than it was at that time. And that is not because Chief Justices have not been drawing attention to the simple facts. In one of my books, I have quoted judgments of the of Maharashtra, of a of a committee that was set up on the poor infrastructure under which district courts have to function. They don't have space to put the files, and that must be now 15 years old. And that there have been these conclaves of chief justices and chief ministers. This time the prime minister himself attended. And again they said, yes, we will do something for infrastructure, and they don't do it. So it's so for all these predictable reasons, things don't get done, and it is terrible. It's not a reflection on our work, it is a reflection on society and on the sorry pass to which society has come. You know, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew once said of India that India will be, he said, India is a land of great potential. It's not realizing its potential because these obvious changes are not being made. So causes are lost, and that's a sad thing, not for individuals like us. We may get little thrills on the little wavelets that we are able to cause, but the system doesn't change.
I know. It's a pity. Talking about how you have done things differently, like your journalism, one of the things you've done very differently is this book itself. So you have large passages of what you recall as original, Hindi, Punjabi, and, especially Ramnathji and his expletives. So today people try to deify him, and, you've shown him the kind of person he was, including his aphorisms, his guru mantras. There's a lot of positive and, some of it which would probably get people's hackles up. So in the process, you also revealed a lot of things. For instance, I had no idea that it was the Hinduja brothers who gave you the first, clue about what was happening with Antule and the money that he was collecting. I mean, everyone associates Hindujas with Bofors, never thought they had anything to do with the Antule scam. So what was your thought process behind choosing this form of writing?
Well, partly because I had taken notes at that time, partly and because I remembered those things. These were vivid things, and why camouflage anything? For instance, even translation. Supposing I only gave them in English, and wherever the abuse occurs, I put ... Well, that is certainly not fair to Ramnathji, to Mr. Dalal. They talked freely. In a sense, they were persons, they were really what we call sons of the soil. And it was a delight to be around them. Because all of us, Debashis, all of us come from a different background. We have gone to schools, we have gone to colleges, and many of them had not. And the kind of schools to which they went were very different. Their Similes and allusions would be very different. They would be from mythology. They would be so. Uh, why dress it up to the extent that we can recall them, and we should put the thing out. And in many of these cases, for instance, Mrs. Devilal using strong words about Arun Nehru, I wrote it the next day in the newspaper. I think we were in the Indian Express at that time, the only English paper which had put Ben Chod on the front page. Because that's what he called Arun Nehru. So I put it there. And so, and to him, it would not be an abuse. It is a colloquialism. For him, he talks like that. So I did not see any reason why we should not. And that brings out the type of persons they were. You were saying about Ramnaji. Yes, he was a very complex man. Most of us are complex in a small way. He was complex in a large way. And he was a great fighter. He was very clever. But he had a great courage also. So to bring out all that and just say, oh, he was a courageous man, or he was tactful, or he had craft of this, that, and the other, it does not convey the person. So that was the reason I mentioned this. I wrote like this.
In fact, one of the most interesting points you mentioned about Ramnathji's last card was his first card, which I thought was dramatic in terms of how his mental makeup was.
Yes, actually, that's a sentence of Guru Murthy's, and that Ramnathji had this courage that he could always play the last card first, because it was Guru Mantra, that you have to do something which the adversary does not expect you to do. So what is it? He will think, oh, you are going to go slowly, then you'll take this step, and then you will go to the court, then you will do this, then you will go to the labor commissioner. But he closes the paper. Then now Mr. Datta Samant is nonplussed. So because there is nothing now to bargain with him about. He said, no, I'm closing the paper, I'm going to sell the building also. And when we realized that Mr. Datta Samant was trying to mislead our colleagues and workers by saying, oh, Ramnath se baatein ho rahi hain, ye bora, we put out the counter story that actually Ramnathji had left for Europe. And there was no question of talking to anybody. So, unless we bring out all these things, we will not be able to convey what the circumstances at that time were, the circumstances in which work was done.
Yes.
A word about the role of opposition. Throughout your book, you've narrated protests and demonstrations led by opposition leaders throughout almost 10 years of your Indian Express. Now, that was in fact the situation. In fact, I spent my youth in Calcutta where the city was paralyzed even by the ruling party with protests. The CPM used to hold a rally every other week, even though they were ruling party. But these days, we hardly see any political protest, no matter how egregious a state's actions are. So the last movement, if you remember, was India Against Corruption in 2013. So while the state has remained the same cruel, extortive, secretive, etc., has something changed in how we react to the state? That is, have we become, are we seized more by apathy? Where is the protest?
Yes, there are three reasons for this. The first reason is that there have been so many, I quoted a line of Agay, the great Hindi poet, in which he said, "Kitni naavon mein kitni baar." In how many boats we set afloat, how many times? And then nothing happened. Independence movement, JP's movement, and against the people voting out Mrs. Gandhi, NTR's movement, the Assam movement, all these, and then in the end, the result was the same. So people then get disillusioned there. Now, there is a very important lesson in that. You see, movements are in a sense avalanches or great strong waves. But the after the movement, there has to be some institutionalization of the ideas for which that movement worked. Now, that doesn't happen. For instance, if the movement is so great that people leading it become part of a government, up here in Delhi now, or the Janata Party leaders after the victory in 1977, but then they become part of the government and behave like any other government minister, then people certainly get disillusioned. And the next time such an occasion arises, they say, "Arey yaar, पिछली बार कुछ नहीं हुआ था, इस बार क्या होगा?" So you become that. Second reason for apathy, I think, is that people are now much more money than they were at that time. The middle class people were not making that much money at that time as they are now today. Lawyers, journalists, doctors,
Government officials.
they were not making that much money, and money was not that important to them as it is today. So if you are busy making money, you are not going to be, you won't have time for public causes. And that's absolutely correct, that you cannot serve God and mammon together. That's one reason. But I think there is a third reason, and that is that the quality of persons in all professions, and certainly in public life, in politics, has gone down. You know, I remember days even when I was in college or later on, a single person like Mr. Basu of the CPM, a single person, or Mr. Nathpai or Madhu Lime, of course, Acharya Kriplani and others, when they stood up to speak, everybody listened, partly because Panditji listened. But even after Panditji, the homework that Mr. Madhu Lime will do, the homework that Jyotirmay Basu will do, or Nathpai will do, really changed the quality of debate, or the eloquence of a person like Mr. Bajpayee, or the methodical way in which Mr. Advani will speak in the House. That had tremendous effect. So that caliber of leaders has gone down so precipitously to such a dangerous level in just 30 years, 30, 40 years, that is the base of the disillusionment of the people also. You see, if you want to take a current example, if we want to mobilize people against, let us assume, Mr. Narendra Modi, then we have to be different. Leaders who are important in their own states, they say Modi is a dictator. But the leaders in the state see you as a dictator. And for them, Modi is very distant. He's in Belgium. He's in the Nordic countries. You are here and you are acting in the same dictatorial way. Then why will they be that enthused by you? Why will they come out on the streets at your call? They may come out because of loyalty, because of party networks and cadre and so on. But it will not be a people's movement. That happened in Assam. So long as the students were very different from the rulers, the whole of Assam was with them. When they came to office and Praful Mohanta and Bhrigu Kukan started quarreling with each other, then the disillusionment was there. And I'm sure that if the two of them had got together again and then again asked the people to come out on the streets, it would not have happened to the same extent. So if you want people to come out, you have to be very different from the ones whom you are opposing.
Absolutely. Mr. Shourie, I want to come back.
Ramnaji used to have another phrase, and you could apply that to trade union leaders. You could apply it to journalists, but he used to talk about journalists in that way. He said, journalists used to be missionaries. Now they have become mercenaries. So also the leaders. People must, India responds to ideals. Gandhiji, no office. Jayaprakash Narayan, no office. Almost, if I may use a very strong word, almost only half living at that time. But he became the symbol of the people's aspiration for freedom. JP in 1975, 76, 77, because he was really different. He lived the values which he was speaking about. Can we say that about our leaders today? That's why people don't come out on the streets.
So, Mr. Shourie, you're completely right about that. So, we keep complaining that the political establishment, we don't have the leaders, we don't have the role models, and it lets us down. But the judiciary is equally responsible for creating this sense of futility. And I know that even you have looked at it very, very closely. In fact, you've talked in this book about the Hope and Trust School of Jurisprudence. And, for me, that was very intriguing because you've also made the point that, during some of the things like the under trials or the Bhagalpur blindings, the judiciary, having been embarrassed or having embarrassed themselves during the emergency, was trying to redeem itself. But even then, even at that time, you talk about the Hope and Trust School of Jurisprudence, where they just refused to use the powers they had very decisively against governments. And that has, now become 20 times, 30 times worse until there is no hope and expectation of justice at all among most people. So, would you want to talk a little about this?
Yeah. Now, firstly, I emphasize the role of the leaders, but we must remember what Gandhiji always said, that he said that this thing that Yatha Raja Tatha Praja is true, but it is only a half truth. Because Yatha Praja Tatha Raja, as they ruled, so the rulers. So we should not shut our eyes to our own contribution to bringing such, they are caricatures of us, these leaders. That's one point. And secondly, on the judiciary, you are absolutely right. I think that the quality of judges is certainly, it has been subject to the same law as the quality of persons in public life or journalism or anything else. But what has happened is that somehow the judges are satisfied by just giving their orders. And probably this comes from a tradition or from inheriting a system from Britain at a time when the mere word of a judge would automatically be obeyed. Today, that's not the case. People just don't obey your guidelines, your judgments. And if I may give an example, and that Hope and Trust School was like that. It was an escape. Why are you not following up? I've shown here, because of the information that Arun Sinha kindly collected for me, as to the current state. Some pittance for a pension was to be given every month to those persons who were blinded in Bhagalpur. That was on the orders of the Supreme Court. Even that was not being given. When Arun inquired of it through a local lawyer who had been taking up their cases for all these years, so many of them have perhaps died. It will be of no consequence to the Bihar budget to give that little pittance. But it was not being given. And the courts certainly are not exercised about the matter. They have not been inquired whether it is happening. Similarly, about the census for under trials, I think it was the case that it was to be held every 2 years. Has it been held? That is how, but we hope and trust. It was Justice Bhagwati's phrase. We hope and trust that the state will now do this, that, or the other. I'll give you a current example, which is before the Supreme Court. I mean, I'm not in any way, I don't think there'll be anything wrong in just giving that example. You see, the Supreme Court is examining this question of sedition. It turns out that there are about 800 sedition cases since 2010, and about 13,000, on one estimate, 20,000 persons have been charged with sedition. And sometimes it is so silly things. That Debashis had a motorcycle and he modified his silencer so that it makes now a very big noise, and he was passing by my house and that disturbed my sister and her baby, and therefore the police registered a case of what? Of sedition. Some marital dispute, fisticuffs take place, and case of sedition for criticizing the prime minister or chief minister, sedition, for making what are called derogatory references to a chief minister or a prime minister, sedition. Now, in the judgment of the Supreme Court, in a famous case called Kedarnath Singh, now in that judgment, it is clear, strong words, a strong speech is not sedition. It is incitement to violence. And while the section says that it is disaffection of government, again, disaffection, causing disaffection of government, the actually implication really is causing, jeopardizing the sovereignty, integrity, etc. of the state of India. But these cases go on. CAA, okay, an act is passed. The government feels that this is necessary for India, the sovereignty of India, the unity of India. Others feel that no, the provisions are such that people will get offended, divisions will come about, and that will endanger the integrity, sovereignty, and unity of India. So if somebody writes, if somebody speaks, makes a public speech, or somebody joins a peaceful demonstration, how is sedition? Supporting the act or opposing the act are equally motivated by commitment to the sovereignty and integrity of India. But thousands of people were arrested and charged with sedition, and the judiciary did nothing, has not done anything. So when your guidelines are so openly flouted and you don't take action on that, and that is contempt of court. That is really contempt of court, not because somebody uses an adjective against a judge or a court.
Absolutely.
This does not take action against on such an occasion, on such a violation of your guidelines, then people will just say, "अरे यार ये तो बोलते ही रहते हैं, इनको अंग्रेजी आती है ये," they just give long sentences and long lectures. So I think the judiciary should certainly come down very harshly on persons who violate its guidelines and don't do this hope and trust business. People are not obeying your guidelines.
True. So
because you are not enforcing them. Sucheta, you will know, Debashis will know better than I do. In the bankruptcy code, how many, what is the time limit?
7 days.
180
I
days.
think 90 days.
No,
90 days,
Now increased to
stretchable to 180. Okay. Now, firstly, why did you increase it? That itself shows laxity. But you just see that in that thing also, how things are just going on and on and on. And the judges are sitting there after all these tribunals are manned by judges.
True.
In any case, the Supreme Court, it's the only court, as Mr. F.S. Fadi Nariman always reminds us, it is the only court in India, in the world, which has this power of Article 143, that it can take any step that is required for ensuring justice. So you can do anything. That's the power that has been given to you. But when you don't exercise it and just go to your next lecture, then people will say, "अरे यार lecture देने दो इनको क्या है?"
Exactly, exactly. So, in this context, while the judiciary, even when it comes to compensation, exemplary damages, lawyers' fees have gone up so much, but the judiciary will not change because, if in fact, where financial matters are concerned, if there are crippling damages, people would hesitate to, flout the rules or break the law. But you don't find that happening with the judiciary. On the other hand, the government has remained the same. I mean, the way it behaves. So, one of the things that I recall while reading about the Indira Gandhi Pratishthan. So, today also you have, a trust in the name of the Prime Minister, which is a private trust. It's not by the first name, but not under RTI, not subject to any oversight, exactly like the Indira Gandhi Pratishthan. The government of that day, the raids that were conducted on the Indian Express, the violent agitation, the trade union strike. I mean, there's nothing that they did not do. So when we see arrests happening today, we think it's happening today, but it was, you faced all of it even those days. But there was still this big silver lining that, in spite of all of that, when the defamation bill was passed, the entire media, whichever way it was, came together and defeated it. And I was reading that and wondering if it were to happen again today, would the entire media come together, or would there be some small ragtag, journalists like us trying to make a difference and we won't matter? How do you think, it'll play out if it were to happen today?
No, there is no media. These are departments of the government. They are channels. These are, I'd had to call them North Korean channels. Do you expect the North Korean channels to come out and demonstrate against Kim? Oh, they won't do it. They are part of the establishment. They are part of the government. So they will not, do anything one centimeter more than an average civil servant today or a minister in Mr. Modi's government or in somebody else's government would do. Those are little, they are what my friend Agnivesh would call bonded labor. Bonded now by silken threads, because of any fear, but because of greed. And, you were reminding me about those, the comparison of the trust. There are so many differences. Antuli went because he had collected a pittance of 5 crores. आजकल 5 करोड़ से तो लोगों की ये दांत भी गीले नहीं होंगे. And as you rightly said about the trust, the Prime Minister's trust, how can it be? Firstly, it is said to be a government trust or not a government trust. There have been stories showing that it is neither. How can the law allow something like that? And during the Andole period, that it was said that no, but the Pratishthan is going to be subject to completely to the government auditors. That was one of the defenses, that everything will be audited today by so-called. I do not know what is the law under which this exemption has been granted, that there shall be no audit. And I think there is something, but he has ruled that it is neither a private trust nor a public trust. This is a new thing. The institutionalization of corruption, as in electoral bonds. And again, the courts, you were mentioning the courts, they are not even hearing the case. It is blatant. 70%, 80% of donations are given only to the government. Suddenly, industrialists are so fond of this Hindutva ideology, is it? So it's not out of conviction. In fact, the Indian Express carried a front page story some weeks ago of an industrialist in Calcutta who said that he had been warned that unless you take electoral bonds of such value and give them to us, excise people will be after you, or the income tax people will be after you. I mean, he said this in an affidavit in a court. Now, this sort of thing never happened at that time at all. And the fact that the papers were being hounded or cases are being filed against us, you see, murder has been going on forever. But that does not excuse murder today or justify murder today.
Absolutely.
And for any government to say, नहीं पहले भी होता था, पंडित जी के टाइम पर भी मिंक कोर्ट के बारे में बात हुई थी, आज बात ही नहीं होती। जी उस समय भी टीटी कृष्णमाचारी को जाना पड़ा था, आज कोई जाता ही नहीं है। So the scale is different, the shamelessness is completely new, everything is different. And in any case, you were elected on the promise that you will not be like the previous people. So to say, no, I am only doing what was done earlier, how is that an explanation or an excuse?
Absolutely. Debs?
In fact, given the state of judiciary, it almost seems like it's a lottery. I mean, you never know which way it's going to turn. I mean, you had Justice Lentil in your case, which was a lucky thing for you. In our case, when National Stock Exchange filed 100 crore defamation, we had Justice Gautam Patel, who's extraordinary in Bombay High Court. But these are exceptions. I mean, people look up to courts for justice. But would you go there if you just think it's like a lottery and it could go in any direction, especially given the high costs of fighting cases?
Yes, it is a lottery. And not just on public causes. It is a lottery even on personal matters. What the judge will do, what the judge will not do, with it really is unfortunately a lottery. And therefore, we cannot expect, I tell you, actually, your work, your excellent work, your path-breaking work on the National Stock Exchange is a very good example. We should not look now. We cannot look now for vindication in the courts. We should be looking for what is called that you have been vindicated by time. They ignored you on the National Stock Exchange, but now this lady, what is that person with the guru? That's
Chitra
Mrs.
Ramakrishna.
Chitra.
Ramakrishna.
She, the new disclosures which have come, vindicate all the things that you were saying all the time. So probably now we should resign ourselves to being vindicated by time and not think that the courts will do something for us, or if the courts do something, anybody else will suffer. I think Mr. Lalu Yadav is probably the only person who has suffered as a result of exposures, and therefore the courts having taken some decision. Nobody else seems to have suffered. Any businessman, this IFLS fellows suffered? Any of the directors suffered?
What happens, they get picked up and they are held without, I mean, that is a punishment enough, because nothing comes up, cases don't come up. And, today the laws are so draconian, whether it's under the ED or it is a PMLA or whatever, they can hold you in jail for years. And that is a punishment, not a trial.
That's a very good point. The process is the punishment. And this has been made into the punishment because you know that in the end, you will not be able to secure a conviction. Look at the rate of conviction secured by the Enforcement Directorate or by the CBI, or in these sedition cases. So you make the process the punishment. And that is certainly very injurious to the helpless, honest person, because he cannot go through that process. So it is almost by design that the rich, that the very influential people, the well-connected people, they will not suffer. because they can manage the process, and in the end, they will not be convicted. But the poor person, the person not connected, not well connected, will be put through that grind. And when you say these very big people are made to suffer in jail, well, that itself should impel them to support reform. I hope more of them are put into jail. Then maybe some lobby will start financing reform also.
Sure. So, one last question before we open it up. Devashish, you were going to ask it?
Yeah, one of the most, as a business journalist, one of the most important things Express did at that time was a campaign on the Reliance, various issues of Reliance, which was led by Guru Murthy. But it all happened under your editorship and your tenure, and but you don't mention that part. So I was just curious why.
Actually, there are many things that I have not been able to mention. The book was already longer than my articles. It was 600 pages. There are many such things. Lunch with Gundu Rao and what happened as a consequence. I wrote something about Kamal Nath's accounts. And many of my friends have told me, but you've forgotten that, you've forgotten that. And Reliance is certainly one of them. And there are several. It actually didn't even cross my mind that I should say something about what was done in Reliance. But in retrospect, and I'm not justifying its omission, there was an important campaign. It made very good points. But two, three things. One, the work was done by my good friend Guru Murthy. And I'm sure that when he writes a book, he will certainly devote a chapter to what he uncovered in Reliance. And he had a very good source, not Nasli Wadia, but another source and his own work, his tooth comb mind by which he can look at figures and so on and read documents that way, which led to a series of stories. So that was one point. But the second point, I'll tell you in retrospect, and I said this at a time then I was roundly criticized. There was an occasion, I think, at the death anniversary of Mr. Dhirubhai Ambani. So there was a function in Bombay. Dr. Manmohan Singh was there, everybody was there, but I was also asked to speak. And I had said at that time that, in a sense, we have to see this is a completely different view from Guru Murthy's view. Because what was Guru Murthy pointing out correctly at that time? Here is a license that has been given for, let us say, production of such and such item up to 100 units. And this fellow is actually producing 130 units.
300.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That with the same equipment, he is producing good thing of 130 units rather than 100 units. Because my own doctoral work on foreign exchange allocation in India done in 1964-65 was against this license quota Raj. And on these limitations which are being put on people. But of course, there's the other view. So long as there is a law, there is a rule, everybody must abide by it. You try to change the rule. Professor Hayek's view was different, as you remember. He said that actually societies never, rulers are never wise enough to change the law when they see some error. But often then that law is violated in practice, becomes so customary that eventually it leads to a change in the law. And I said that people like Dhirubhai Ambani, in that sense, had been doing things against the law and against the restrictive rules at that time. That does not justify what they were doing fully. And certainly there is no claim that Mr. Dhirubhai Ambani or anybody else among them worked for reform of the system. it does not repudiate anything that Gurumurthy wrote at that time about the violation of those rules which were specified. But there is a point to be considered, that when we see violations in a gross way, we should also see something about the law, whether that needs to be changed or not.
That is absolutely correct. That the Reliance's competitors were making the point that he had smuggled in additional capacity by which he was able to produce more, and we haven't done that. So by being
So
sorry.
the answer to that would be that yes, whatever prosecution should be there because of smuggling, yes, that should certainly be there. So on the other side, it should lead all of us to examine whether one should not liberalize the import of capital equipment.
Absolutely, no question.
So both things are necessary.
Right.
Things are necessary.
I have one other point. Normally these kind of thoughts, these thoughts that you just explained, these don't form a part of the thinking process in editorial rooms, especially when it comes to business journalism. So, the big picture, so I'll give you a very good example, which is Shekhar Gupta's article, Indian Express article under Shekhar Gupta, when he exposed that Tata Tea was bribing the Ulfas for doing business in Assam, right? So this is a sensational story. Yes, it's a story. But the fact is that in India, businesses are also in an oppressed state as much as the citizens. The oppressors are the netas and babu, so to speak. So if they create a condition by which businesses have to bribe insurgents to be able to work in that particular part of the country, it is a story. But how would you handle this in the bigger context? I mean, isn't the business being singled out for doing something about which they have no other option?
Yes, I would certainly support the Tatas in that it is, as you rightly said, the failure of the state to provide even elementary security, which leads everybody to, in a sense, privatize his security. You have buildings have guards, houses have guards, colonies have guards. It is the privatization of security, isn't it? That instead of the police and others being able to rely on the police, you have to hire somebody or pay somebody to stand outside your gate. Now, in the same way, if you are working in an insurgent area and the government is not able to handle the insurgency, what should the person do? Should he let his managers be killed? So it is a reflection of the inability of the state to perform its primary functions.
So my question is that if,
yes,
as an editor, I know that, would I carry the story?
Yes, you would carry the story, but I do not know how the story was carried, so please don't think that I'm criticizing what was done. But if I were there, I would carry the story, but I would strongly emphasize that this is the result of the failure of the state of India to discharge even its elementary function, which is of providing citizens security.
Perfect.
Which is what I think most of the media did, Debashis, because everyone supported the Tatas on this while reporting this story. I think we have run out of time. We've exceeded the 1 hour that you promised us. It's been an excellent conversation. We're great admirers, and it's been such a pleasure, honor, and privilege to have you with us. I would once again like to tell everyone, please buy the book, because it's really important to know what went into all those exposures, the blood, the sweat, the tears, the calumny. And it's so easy to criticize the media today because you live in different times, but It is not easy to break a story, it's not easy to stand with it, and it's not easy to write something that changes the nation as Mr. Shourie has done not once but so many times in a short phase of his life when he was an amazing editor. Thank you, Mr. Shourie.
Thank you. Let me add my two
Thank you
bit to
very,
it.
very much. And
Anybody,
I am sure that you don't admire me as much as I admire the work of all of you in
who
Money
will?
Life. It's a daily staple for me and
So,
my window to much of the world.
Okay,
so I would join Sucheta in saying that. I mean, this is, I don't know, somebody said it's too long, but maybe there are some passages where there are excerpts, but this is such a fascinating window to that period. And anybody who has any sense, any interest at all of what India what has gone through during that period, the political economy, the politics of it, the journalism part of it. I mean, it's just an extraordinarily breathtaking expose, and the book looks formidable because it's a larger type. But I think you're going to finish in a couple of days because it's so fantastic and so gripping to read. Thank you, Mr. Shourie, for giving us this book.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you for asking me to come back to Money Life. Thank you.
thank
Thank
you.